My name is Nathalie Wilson. I'm 29 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I had the perfect marriage. 5 years with Jason, and I never imagined it would all come crashing down over a spilled glass of wine and a single shocking moment that changed everything. 1 minute, I was sitting at my in-laws' dinner table. The next, I was watching my father-in-law's hand touch my face while my husband just sat there. When Jason finally spoke, his words shattered my world. Apologize or get out. So, I got out. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever had to choose between your self-respect and someone you love. Jason and I met in a coffee shop near my office in downtown Seattle. I was deep into a freelance project, headphones on, completely in the zone, when someone tapped my shoulder. I looked up, annoyed by the interruption, and found myself looking into the most beautiful blue eyes I had ever seen. Jason was holding my wallet, which had fallen out of my bag without me noticing. "I think this is yours," he said, with a smile that made me forget why I was irritated. I thanked him, and he asked if he could join me. We ended up talking for 3 hours. I missed 2 meetings, but I didn't care. Jason was intelligent, funny, and seemed genuinely interested in my work as a graphic designer. He didn't just nod along like most guys when I talked about typography and color theory. He asked questions. He worked as a financial analyst at his father's investment firm and had just been promoted to team lead. Our relationship moved quickly after that. Within 6 months, we were practically living together, and after a year and a half, he proposed during a weekend trip to Vancouver. The wedding was beautiful, not too big, not too small. My sister Lauren was my maid of honor, and Jason's college roommate Caleb was his best man. We bought a beautiful condo in a trendy neighborhood with a spare room we planned to turn into a nursery one day. My career was taking off too. I started at a small marketing agency and within 3 years worked my way up to senior graphic designer. My clients loved my work, and I was even considering starting my own studio. Jason was supportive of my ambitions, always bragging about my creativity to his friends. We hosted regular dinner parties, inviting our close couple friends. Madison and Caleb, who had introduced us, often remarked on how perfectly matched we seemed. "You guys never fight," Madison once said, a glass of wine in her hand. Jason and I exchanged a smile. It was true. We rarely disagreed, and when we did, we resolved it quickly. The first sign of trouble appeared when I met Jason's parents, Frank and Diane Wilson. Frank was a self-made businessman who had built Wilson Financial from the ground up. Now in his early 60s, he had the imposing presence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Diane was his opposite, quiet, elegant, and perpetually concerned with keeping Frank happy. Our first dinner at their massive lakefront mansion was tense. Frank dominated the conversation, quizzing me about my family history, my education, and my career in a way that felt more like an interview than a get-to-know-you dinner. "Graphic design," he said, swirling an expensive whiskey in his crystal tumbler. "Is there real money in that, or is it more of a hobby?" I explained that it was a legitimate career with good earning potential, especially in a tech-focused city like Seattle. Frank just nodded dismissively. "Well, at least Jason makes enough for you to switch to something more stable when you have children." I glanced at Jason, expecting him to correct his father's assumption that I would just give up my career, but he just gave an embarrassed smile and changed the subject. In the car on the way home, I mentioned how dismissive Frank's comment had been. "That's just Dad," Jason said with a shrug. "He's from a different generation. Don't take it personally." This became a pattern. Frank would make subtly belittling comments about my career, my clothes, even my opinions on current events. And Jason would explain it away with, "That's just how Dad is." Diane would sit by silently, occasionally shooting me apologetic glances, but never contradicting her husband. My friend Madison noticed the dynamic after a barbecue where both our families were present. "Your father-in-law is intense," she said carefully, "and Jason seems to really care about his approval." "He just respects his parents," I defended, but Madison's observation stuck with me. "Just be careful," she said. "Caleb says Frank has a reputation for being controlling, made a lot of enemies in business." I brushed it off. Every family has its quirks, right? Besides, Jason was nothing like his father. He was kind, thoughtful, and treated me as an equal. Or so I thought. Looking back, I should have paid attention to how Jason's behavior changed around his father. The confident man I knew became almost childlike in Frank's presence, eager for approval and quick to agree with whatever opinion Frank expressed. At the time, I found it odd, but not alarming. If only I had recognized those early red flags for what they were. But when you're in love, you make excuses, you rationalize, you ignore the warning signs waving right in front of your face because acknowledging them would mean admitting that your perfect life might not be so perfect after all, and our life really did look perfect to everyone on the outside. The successful young couple with promising careers, a beautiful home, and a rock-solid marriage, Instagram-worthy vacations, and dinner parties with friends. I truly believed we were building something special together. How could I have known it would all fall apart over a single, spilled glass of wine? As the months and years went on, Frank's behavior toward me grew more and more critical. What started as subtle jabs evolved into outright criticism. During a Thanksgiving dinner in our second year of marriage, Frank spent 10 minutes lecturing me on my choice of centerpiece, explaining why my artistic sensibility was impractical and attention-seeking. A proper table setting should be elegant, but understated, he informed me as Diane sat beside him. This whole modern, shabby chic thing with wildflowers and mismatched candles looks like something out of a college dorm. I had spent hours creating that centerpiece, incorporating elements that represented both Jason's family and my own. Jason, instead of defending my efforts, quickly offered to replace it with something more traditional from his mother's collection. Then came Christmas, when Frank examined my gift to Jason, a custom watch with our wedding date engraved on the back. Seems like a waste of money, since he already has several high-end timepieces, Frank remarked, barely glancing at a watch that had cost me 3 weeks' salary and months of planning. But I suppose it's the thought that counts. When I landed a major client at work and shared the news at a family dinner, Frank immediately questioned if I was equipped for that level of responsibility and suggested Jason review the contract before I signed anything. I had been managing similar clients for years. On every occasion, Jason either remained silent or actively sided with his father. "Dad's just trying to help," he'd explain later. "He wants what's best for us." Diane was no better. Her way of dealing with Frank's behavior was to smooth things over with platitudes. "Frank just wants everyone to succeed," or "it's how he shows he cares," or my personal favorite, "The men in this family have strong opinions. It's a sign of respect that he's so invested." I tried to discuss it with Jason several times. We'd come home from these uncomfortable gatherings, and I'd gently bring up how undermined I felt. "I feel like your father doesn't respect me, and it hurts when you don't defend me," I said after a particularly difficult Easter brunch where Frank had questioned my competence when I mentioned a promotion I was being considered for. "You don't understand our family dynamic," Jason replied, his voice defensive. "Dad pushed me to be my best my whole life. It's why I'm successful. He's just trying to do the same for you." "There's a difference between pushing someone to excel and constantly criticizing them," I countered. "You're being too sensitive. Dad's just direct. It's his way." These conversations became so predictable that I eventually stopped having them. Instead, I started to withdraw, growing quieter at family gatherings and making excuses to miss some of them. Jason noticed, and it angered him. "They're my family, Nathalie. You need to make more of an effort." Meanwhile, Jason was spending more and more time with his parents, golf with Frank on the weekends, lunches with them during the work week, near-daily phone calls with Diane. Our relationship was suffering, too. We were having sex less often. Our conversations became superficial, and I found myself keeping my thoughts and feelings to myself rather than sharing them with my husband. My sister, Lauren, became my confidant. Unlike Madison, who encouraged me to try harder with my in-laws, Lauren saw the unhealthy dynamic immediately. "This isn't normal, Nat," she said during one of our sister nights while Jason was at a business dinner with Frank. "A husband is supposed to have your back, especially against his own family." "It's complicated," I'd argue weakly. Frank built the company Jason works for. Their relationship is important for his career. More important than your marriage? Lauren asked, her eyebrows raised. I had no answer for that. The pressure mounted when Frank and Diane started asking about grandchildren. It began with casual mentions, Diane showing me baby clothes she'd seen while shopping, or Frank commenting on a colleague whose son had already given them 3 grandkids. But it quickly became a constant topic of conversation. "You're not getting any younger, Nathalie," Frank remarked during a Sunday brunch. "Women in your field can work from home, can't they? No reason to put off starting a family." Jason and I had agreed to wait at least 5 years before having kids. We both wanted to be more established in our careers, and I had some health concerns that would complicate a pregnancy. But when I reminded Jason of our plan, he seemed less certain. "Maybe Dad has a point. We're financially stable. Why wait?" It felt like Frank was inserting himself into the most intimate aspects of our marriage, and Jason was allowing it, even encouraging it. My anxiety before family gatherings escalated to the point where I'd develop migraines or stomach issues. Jason accused me of exaggerating to avoid his parents. The distance between us grew into a chasm. Still, I tried. For Jason's sake, I kept showing up for the formal monthly dinners at Frank and Diane's mansion, a tradition Frank insisted on to maintain family bonds. These dinners were elaborate affairs with strict protocols, formal attire required, cocktails at 6 p.m., dinner at 7 p.m. sharp, and specific conversational topics deemed appropriate. Frank at the head of the table, Diane at the foot, Jason and I on either side, with crystal glasses, fine china, and enough tension to suffocate a person. It was at one of these dinners that everything finally fell apart. The dinner was to celebrate Frank and Diane's 35th wedding anniversary. Jason was particularly anxious about making a good impression, reminding me repeatedly about the dress code and the importance of being on time. I wore a navy blue cocktail dress I knew Diane would approve of, and the pearl earrings she had given me for Christmas last year, one of her rare gestures of kindness. We arrived at the mansion at 5:55 p.m., but Jason still fretted that we were cutting it close. The house was as imposing as ever, a 7,000-square-foot lakefront estate with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage that housed Frank's collection of luxury vehicles. A housekeeper met us at the door and took our coats as Jason adjusted his tie for the 3rd time since we'd parked. "There you are," Frank boomed from the living room, a crystal tumbler of whiskey already in hand. His eyes swept over me with a critical gaze. "Nathalie, isn't that dress a bit casual for an anniversary celebration?" "I think she looks beautiful, Dad," Jason said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You're late," Frank continued, checking his Rolex, though we were still 5 minutes early by any normal standard. "Traffic," I offered quickly. "It won't happen again." Diane floated in, wearing a designer gown that probably cost more than my monthly salary. "You both look lovely," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "Come, have a drink. Frank is opening a special bottle of wine for dinner." The living room was decorated with fresh flowers and framed photos from Frank and Diane's wedding and life together. I complimented the arrangements, and Diane smiled genuinely for the first time. 35 years, Frank announced, raising his glass. "Now that's commitment. You young people could learn a thing or two about sticking it out through tough times." I bit my tongue, accepting a glass of champagne from the housekeeper. Jason immediately launched into a conversation with his father about work, specifically the promotion he'd recently received to senior financial analyst. It wasn't so much a promotion as a title change orchestrated by Frank, but Jason spoke of it as if he had competed for the position. "Nathalie," Diane said, steering me away from the men, "how is your little design job going?" "My role as senior graphic designer is going well," I corrected gently. "In fact, I just completed a major rebrand for a tech startup that's getting a lot of positive attention." "That's nice, dear," she said vaguely, "though I always thought you'd have moved on to something more substantial by now, especially with the thought of starting a family soon." Before I could even explain that we had no immediate plans for children, the housekeeper announced that dinner was served. We moved to the formal dining room, where the table was laid with what I recognized as the house's finest china and crystal, sets reserved for only the most special of occasions. Frank lingered on a description of the wine he'd chosen, a rare vintage from a small French vineyard. Almost impossible to find in the States, he boasted as the housekeeper poured. Costs more than most people's monthly rent, but some things are worth the investment. I nodded politely, acutely aware of the expensive liquid in my glass, and Frank's eyes tracking my every move. The first course arrived, a delicate seafood appetizer that Frank remarked was likely too sophisticated for my palate. The conversation then shifted to Jason's department at work. Frank, it seemed, had overridden Jason's hiring decision for a new analyst position. Jason wanted to hire some young woman, fresh out of college, Frank explained to Diane, as if I weren't even there. I had to explain to him that client relations require a certain gravitas. We went with Bill Peterson's son. Jason stared down at his plate. Dad made the right call, he mumbled. I was thinking too progressively. A pang of disappointment hit me. The candidate Jason had initially wanted was exceptionally qualified, with internships at top-tier firms. He had been so excited about bringing a fresh perspective to his team. Now, he was just endorsing his father's blatant nepotism. I thought Caroline's qualifications were really impressive, I said, venturing cautiously. Frank's eyes narrowed. Office dynamics are more complex than what you're used to in your little creative world, Nathalie. In a proper corporate environment, certain standards must be upheld. The implied criticism hung heavy in the air. I took a sip of the exorbitant wine, trying to soothe my frayed nerves. Frank then pivoted the conversation to my recent freelance project, information Jason must have shared with him. Building websites for a friend's catering service? Isn't that a bit of a step down from your agency work? He asked, feigning concern. It's not a step down, I explained. Amy is expanding her business and needed a complete rebrand. I'm helping her as a friend and as a professional. Frank grunted dismissively. Sounds like a hobby. I'd be concerned if I were you, Jason. Stability is important in a marriage. My hands were trembling slightly with suppressed anger. I reached for a bread roll, needing something to do other than retort to Frank's belittling comments. What happened next unfolded in a slow-motion blur. As I reached across the table, my sleeve caught the base of my wine glass. I felt the resistance, tried to correct it, but it was too late. The glass tipped, sending a wave of deep red wine cascading across the pristine white tablecloth. I gasped, grabbing for my napkin, but the stain was spreading rapidly, a crimson tide heading straight for Frank. Before I could even apologize, Frank shot up with an agility that belied his age, but not before the wine splashed onto his cream-colored dress shirt and what he had earlier informed us was a $5,000 blazer. "You clumsy, incompetent girl!" he roared, his face contorted in a mask of fury. And then it happened. Frank's right hand shot out, striking my cheek with enough force to snap my head to the side. The sharp crack of the slap echoed in the suddenly silent dining room. For a moment, no one moved. I brought a hand to my stinging face, tears welling in my eyes from both the pain and the shock. Diane sat frozen, her napkin suspended halfway to her lips. The housekeeper, who had been entering with the main course, beat a hasty retreat. But it was Jason's face I searched for. My husband, the man who had vowed to love and protect me, sat motionless, his eyes wide. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his father, with an expression that seemed to be a mixture of embarrassment and, was it fear? "Dad," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. But he didn't continue. He didn't defend me. He didn't express any outrage. Frank was busy brushing at his ruined jacket, glaring at me with contempt. "Look what you made me do," he said, as if I were the one who had struck him. I pushed my chair back from the table, tears now streaming freely down my face. Without a word, I stood and walked as steadily as I could to the nearest guest bathroom, locking the door behind me. My reflection showed a bright red mark blooming on my left cheek. I couldn't believe what had just happened. My father-in-law had actually hit me, struck me across the face, over spilled wine. And Jason had just sat there and said nothing. A soft knock came at the door. "Nathalie? It's Diane. Are you all right?" I didn't answer, but she persisted until I reluctantly unlocked it. She slipped inside, closing it behind her, and offered me a cool washcloth for my face. "I'm so sorry about that," she said in a low voice. "Frank is just very particular about his things. That suit was custom-made in Italy." I stared at her, incredulous. "He hit me, Diane, over a suit." She looked down, fiddling with her wedding ring. "He has a temper. He doesn't mean anything by it, it's just his way." "His way is to strike women when he's angry?" I asked, my voice laced with disbelief. Diane didn't answer directly. "You should come back to the table. The salmon will get cold, and Frank hates waste." It was then that I understood the true depth of the dysfunction I had married into. Diane wasn't just enabling Frank's behavior. She was so deeply conditioned by it that she saw nothing fundamentally wrong with what had just transpired. I was faced with a choice: leave immediately or return to the table and preserve some semblance of dignity by finishing the meal. Foolishly, I chose the latter, thinking Jason and I would leave right after and finally have the conversation we so desperately needed to have about his parents. When I returned, everyone was seated as if nothing had happened. The spilled wine had been cleared away, fresh glasses were poured, and Frank was carving into a side of salmon, describing its provenance to a subdued Jason. "There she is," Frank said without looking up. "Shall we carry on?" Not a word of apology, not a hint of remorse. And still, Jason said nothing. I sat down, unable to eat, pushing the food around my plate as the conversation restarted around me. Frank discussed the stock market. Diane asked about a colleague's wife. Jason answered his parents' questions dutifully. I remained silent, feeling as though I had stepped into a bizarre parallel universe where dinner table assault was perfectly acceptable behavior. Later that night, as I lay wide awake in our bed, Jason sleeping soundly beside me as if his world hadn't just imploded, I knew with a chilling clarity that no conversation would change the fundamental truth. My husband had failed me at the moment I needed him most, and he would fail me again if given the chance. The next morning, Jason acted as if nothing of significance had occurred. He made coffee, scrolled through emails on his phone, and mentioned a client dinner he had scheduled for the following week. "Did you hear me?" he asked when I didn't respond to his question about whether I could join them. "The Andersons are important clients. Dad thinks it would make a good impression if you came." "I'm not going anywhere with your father," I said softly, gripping my coffee mug with both hands. Jason sighed dramatically. "Are you still on about last night? I told you, it wasn't a big deal." Before I could reply, his phone rang. Jason glanced at the screen, and his expression shifted subtly, that all-too-familiar mixture of deference and anxiety. He answered immediately, turning his back to me. "Hi, Dad. Yes, we got home fine. No, not yet." He shot a look over his shoulder at me. "I'm working on it. I understand. Yes, sir. I'll let her know." He ended the call and turned back to me, his expression resolute. "That was Dad. He's expecting a personal apology from you today." Something inside me hardened. "That's not going to happen." "Nathalie, be reasonable. You spilled wine all over a $5,000 suit. The least you can do is apologize." "He hit me, Jason. He physically assaulted me for an accident. I am not apologizing to him." Jason slammed his hand on the counter, making me jump. "Why do you have to be so difficult? Just swallow your pride and say you're sorry. This is what it means to be part of a family. Sometimes you have to compromise." "A compromise?" I repeated, incredulous. "Being assaulted isn't a compromise. It's abuse. And you just sitting there while it happened and then defending him? That's a betrayal." "You're overreacting," Jason insisted. "It was a slap, not a punch. You're fine." I touched my cheek, where a faint bruise was now forming. "Would you say that if I had hit you? Or if you saw a stranger hit a woman in public? Would that be acceptable too?" Jason avoided my gaze. "That's different." "How? How is it different?" "Because he's my father," Jason yelled. "Because he gave me everything. Because without him, I wouldn't have my job or this apartment or any of this." And there it was. The truth, laid bare. Jason's loyalty wasn't to me, his wife. It was to the man who controlled his career, his finances, his very sense of self. I see, I said quietly. So this is your final position. I need to apologize to your father for being hit? Or what? Jason's expression hardened. Either you apologize, or you need to leave. I can't have this tension between my wife and my parents. It's not sustainable. The moment stretched between us. 5 years of marriage balanced on a knife's edge. In that instant, I saw my future with perfect clarity if I stayed. A lifetime of shrinking myself to accommodate Frank's ego, with Jason never standing up for me, raising children in an environment where abuse was excused as just his way. I'll leave, I said simply. Jason looked stunned, as if he never expected me to choose self-respect over our marriage. You're not serious. I am, I replied, feeling strangely calm. I deserve better than this. You're being dramatic, he insisted. Take the day, cool off, think about it. My mind is made up. He left for work soon after, clearly believing I would reconsider once I was alone, but his departure only solidified my resolve. I called in sick to work and began to pack. It was surprising how few of my belongings felt essential. Clothes, personal documents, jewelry that had belonged to my family, my laptop and design equipment, a few cherished books and photographs. I left behind the wedding album, the gifts from Frank and Diane, the furniture we had chosen together. Those things belonged to a life I now realized had been built on an illusion. I called my sister Lauren, who answered on the first ring. Nat, you're not at work. Frank hit me last night, I said without preamble. Jason wants me to apologize to him. I'm leaving. There was a short silence. Then, my guest room is yours for as long as you need it. Do you want me to come help you pack? A wave of gratitude for my sister's immediate, unconditional support washed over me. No, I'm almost done, but thank you. Text me when you're on your way. I'll be here. I wrote a short note and placed it on the counter next to my wedding ring. I deserve better than this. Don't contact me. I'll be in touch when I'm ready. As I carried the last suitcase to my car, our neighbor, Mrs. Tim, stepped out of her apartment. Moving out? She asked, her eyebrows raised in surprise. Just for a little while, I said, not ready to share the whole truth. She nodded thoughtfully. I heard some shouting this morning. Is everything all right? It will be, I said, surprised by how much I believed it. The drive to Lauren's apartment was surreal. 5 years of marriage, over in less than 24 hours. I oscillated between disbelief, grief, and a strange sense of liberation. By the time I parked in front of Lauren's building, tears were streaming down my face, but they weren't just tears of sorrow. Lauren was waiting at the door. She took one look at my face and pulled me into a fierce hug. You did the right thing, she whispered vehemently. I'm so proud of you. Inside, Lauren had already made up the guest room with fresh sheets and cleared space in the closet. On the kitchen counter sat a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Then she caught my expression and winced. Too soon for wine? She asked. I managed a weak laugh. Maybe for a few days. Lauren helped me bring in my bags, and we settled onto her couch. For the first time, I told her the full story of my relationship with Jason's parents, all the red flags I'd ignored, the gradual erosion of my self-worth, Jason's increasing deference to his father. I should have seen it sooner, I finished. Don't do that, Lauren said firmly. This is not on you. The people who were supposed to love and protect you failed spectacularly. The fault is theirs, not yours. Throughout our conversation, my phone buzzed incessantly. Jason calling over and over, then texting. Where are you? This is ridiculous. Come home. You're overreacting. Dad is really upset. You're ruining everything. Please, let's just talk about this. The messages toggled between anger and pleading. I showed them to Lauren, who snorted in disgust. Block him, she advised, at least for now. She told me to give him space to think, free from his father's manipulation. I hesitated, then took her advice. The immediate silence from my phone was both unsettling and serene. That night, in Lauren's guest room, I had my first taste of freedom. It was a complex emotional landscape. Grief for the marriage I thought I had, fear of an uncertain future, but also a profound, grounding sense of relief. I had stood up for myself in what felt like the most significant way possible. The next day, I contacted Mia, a friend from law school who specialized in family law. She agreed to meet for coffee to discuss my options. "Based on what you've told me, you have grounds for a restraining order against your father-in-law," she explained, her gaze steady. "As for the separation, Washington is a no-fault state, so the process is relatively straightforward. But considering Jason's family's resources, you should expect them to make things difficult." "What do you mean?" "Frank Wilson has connections all over Seattle, judges, clerks, other lawyers. He's donated to half the legal establishments in the city. Document everything," Mia advised. "The incident, Jason's response, any previous troubling behavior, and I'm going to refer you to a colleague in Tacoma outside of Frank's immediate sphere of influence." As I began to tell close friends what had happened, the reactions were mixed. While most were supportive, a few questioned my decision. "Are you sure you're not overreacting?" asked Rita, a friend from college. "Every marriage has its rough patches." "He let his father hit me, Rita. This isn't a rough patch." 5 years of marriage, though. Don't you think you should try therapy first?" Their reactions made me doubt myself for a moment, but Lauren remained my steadfast supporter. "People get uncomfortable with women who set boundaries," she explained. "It makes them question their own choices. Don't let their discomfort undermine your decision." A week after I left, I had my first full night of uninterrupted sleep. It was a small but significant victory. A week after that, I was sorting through job applications at Lauren's dining table when there was a knock at the door. Lauren was at work, so I approached cautiously and peered through the peephole. Jason stood in the hallway, looking more disheveled than I had ever seen him, unshaven, his hair a mess, wearing a wrinkled shirt. I hesitated, then opened the door but blocked the entrance with my body. "What are you doing here?" "Can I come in?" he asked. "Please, Nat, I just want to talk." Against my better judgment, I let him in, keeping the door ajar and a careful distance between us. "You look great," he said awkwardly, taking in my appearance. I had started doing yoga with Lauren each morning, and despite everything, I was sleeping better than I had in months. "What do you want, Jason?" He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture I used to find endearing. "I want you to come home. This separation has gone on long enough." "It's been a week," I pointed out. "Dad's really sorry, in his own way," Jason continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "He won't say it outright, but he mentioned he might have overreacted." "Overreacted," I repeated, my voice laced with disbelief. "He hit me, Jason. That's not an overreaction. It's assault." Jason flinched. "Can you stop using that word? It makes it sound so much worse than it was." "It's the exact word," I countered, "and the fact that you keep minimizing what happened tells me nothing has changed." He sank heavily onto Lauren's sofa. "What do you want from me, Nathalie? I'm trying here." "Are you?" "Because it sounds like you're still prioritizing your father's feelings over what actually happened." "You don't understand," Jason said, his voice cracking. "It's not the first time." I stared at him. "What?" He's always had a temper. When I was a kid, sometimes he would..." Jason trailed off, staring at his hands. "He hit you too," I realized, a wave of horror washing over me. Jason gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "And Mom, usually after he'd been drinking. It wasn't often, but when it happened..." He shuddered slightly. "We just never talked about it afterward. That was the rule." In that moment, a complex mix of emotions swirled within me. Pity for the boy Jason had been, revulsion for the cycle of abuse he was now perpetuating, and absolute certainty that I was making the right decision. "Jason," I said gently, "I am so sorry that happened to you. I truly am. But don't you see you're continuing the pattern? By excusing his behavior, by expecting me to just absorb the abuse and pretend it didn't happen, you are becoming him." He looked up sharply. "I am nothing like him." You're defending a man who hit your wife. What else would you call it? Jason shot to his feet. I knew this was a mistake. You've always judged my family. Always thought you were better than us. That's not true, I said, but he was already heading for the door. Let me know when you're ready to be reasonable, he called over his shoulder. After he left, I called Mia immediately. She confirmed that Jason had, in fact, filed for legal separation the day before. This is actually good for us, she explained. It gives us time to prepare our case. I'm going to connect you with a financial advisor to help protect your assets. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal consultations, paperwork, and difficult decisions. I found a small studio apartment I could afford on my salary and signed a 6-month lease. Lauren helped me furnish it with thrift store finds and a few key pieces from her own home. It's not much, I said, as we arranged the last of the furniture. But it's mine. It's perfect, Lauren insisted, and it's just the beginning. Frank, true to Mia's prediction, tried to make things difficult. He used his connections to delay court dates and filed motions contesting my claim to our shared assets. More disturbingly, I found out through a colleague that he had contacted my agency's biggest client, insinuating that I was unstable and unreliable. Thankfully, my work spoke for itself, and my boss stood by me after I explained the situation. Frank Wilson doesn't intimidate me, she said firmly. Your work is exceptional, and that's all that matters to this agency. Still, the stress took its toll. I lost weight, developed insomnia, and began to startle at loud noises. On my sister's recommendation, I began seeing a therapist, Dr. Karen Mitchell. What you're experiencing is a normal trauma response, she explained during our first session. Both the physical assault and the betrayal by your husband have created a kind of psychological injury. In the months that followed, Dr. Mitchell helped me recognize patterns in my relationship with Jason that I had normalized, how I had gradually made myself smaller to avoid conflict, how I had accepted increasingly disrespectful treatment from his parents, how I had lost touch with my own needs and boundaries. The good news, she told me, is that you've shown incredible strength by leaving. Many people never take that step. Through therapy, I also connected with a support group for women leaving difficult relationships. There, I met Audrey, whose story was hauntingly similar to my own. Her father-in-law was emotionally abusive, and her husband always sided with his father. It's like they're still little boys, desperate for daddy's approval, she remarked during one session. Only we're the ones who pay the price. Audrey became a close friend and an ally through the divorce proceedings. She was 6 months ahead of me in her own journey and offered practical advice on everything from legal strategies to navigating mutual friends who took sides. The division of assets proved complicated. The down payment for our apartment had been a gift from Frank, which Jason's lawyers now argued gave his family a financial stake in the property. My retirement account, which I'd built before the marriage, was safe, but our joint savings became a battleground. Some mutual friends naturally took sides. Madison, who had introduced us, remained neutral but distant. I just don't want to get in the middle of it, she explained, declining my invitation for coffee. Other friends, especially those who had witnessed Frank's behavior firsthand, sent messages of support. 3 months after leaving, I faced my first holiday alone. Lauren invited me to Thanksgiving, but I chose to volunteer at a local shelter instead. I need to create new traditions, I explained, ones that aren't shadowed by old memories. Serving meals to those less fortunate gave me an unexpected perspective. Many of the women I met had left abusive situations with far fewer resources than I had. Their resilience was inspiring. At Christmas, I joined Lauren and her boyfriend for a quiet celebration. When I unwrapped her gift, a framed print that read, "Sometimes the bravest thing is to begin again," I started to cry. "Happy tears," I assured her, wiping my eyes. I think I'm finally starting to believe that. The divorce process ground on. Jason's initial anger gave way to sporadic attempts at reconciliation, usually after he'd been drinking. "We could try therapy," he'd suggest during one of his late-night calls. "I miss you, Nat." "I miss the man I thought you were," I'd reply honestly, "but not the man you are." By the 6-month mark, I had settled into a new routine: work, therapy, yoga, occasional meetups with friends, and quiet nights in my small but cozy apartment. The panic attacks had subsided, and I was sleeping through the night more often than not. But I wasn't ready to date. Several friends offered to set me up. "I'm still finding myself again," I explained when Lauren suggested a colleague. "I need to be completely whole before I can think about sharing my life with someone else." What surprised me most during this time was discovering how much of myself I had suppressed during my marriage. Opinions I had censored, interests I had abandoned, friendships I had neglected, all in the service of keeping the peace with Jason and his parents. As I reclaimed these parts of myself, I began to feel a growing sense of excitement about the future, not in spite of being alone, but because of the freedom it represented. 1 year after the wine incident, my divorce was finalized. The settlement was fair, thanks in large part to my lawyer's diligence and the evidence I had documented of Frank's behavior and Jason's enabling. I kept my retirement account, received half the equity from our apartment, which Jason opted to sell, and maintained full ownership of my design business, which I had officially established 3 months prior. My studio apartment had become a true home, filled with art I loved, furniture that expressed my aesthetic instead of conforming to Diane's conservative tastes, and plants that thrived under my care. It was my independence in physical form. Professionally, I had flourished. After the incident with Frank trying to influence my agency's client, I decided to commit to my freelance work full-time. My old boss became my first client, and referrals quickly built a sustainable business. I specialized in branding for women-led companies, finding purpose in helping other women establish and grow their own independent ventures. The final encounter with Jason happened unexpectedly at Madison and Caleb's wedding. I had considered declining the invitation, but decided that avoiding social events for fear of seeing my ex-husband was giving him too much power over my life. I wore a red dress, a color Diane had always said drew too much attention, and went with Lauren as my date. Jason was there with a date, a woman who looked strikingly like a younger version of his mother. We managed to avoid each other until the reception was winding down. I was waiting for Lauren to come back from the restroom when Jason approached, a drink in his hand. "You look beautiful," he said, echoing his words from that day in Lauren's apartment. "Thank you," I replied simply. "Congratulations on the Anderson account," he said. "Madison mentioned you're heading up the project." I nodded, surprised at my own cordial tone. "Thanks. Your business seems to be doing well, too. I saw your design work for that new restaurant downtown." An awkward silence settled between us. "Nathalie," he finally said, his voice softer now. "I've been going to therapy. I should have handled things differently, with my dad, with us, with everything." It wasn't quite an apology, but it was more self-awareness than I had ever heard from him during our marriage. "I'm glad you're getting help," I said, and I meant it. "Dad had another incident," Jason went on, staring into his drink. "At a company event. There were witnesses this time. The board insisted he step down." "I'm sorry," I said, and I was. Not for Frank, but for the complex emotions Jason must be feeling. "Don't be. It was long overdue." He looked up at me. "You were right to leave. I see that now." Before I could respond, Lauren returned, placing a protective hand on my arm. "Everything okay here?" "It's fine," I assured her. "Jason was just leaving." He nodded, seeming to understand that whatever closure this conversation offered was as much as either of us would get. "Take care, Nathalie." As I watched him walk away, I felt the last threads of our connection snap, not with anger or regret, but with acceptance. In the months that followed, I continued to build my new life. I set firm boundaries with everyone, from clients to friends, to the occasional dates I finally felt ready to go on. I became vigilant about recognizing red flags in relationships of all kinds, no longer willing to dismiss troubling behavior as just the way they are. When I met Kevin, a landscape architect with kind eyes and a history of setting firm boundaries with difficult family, I approached our relationship with cautious optimism. Our connection grew slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and open communication. On our third date, he said, "I want to know your boundaries. What makes you feel safe and respected?" The question brought tears to my eyes, not because it was extraordinary, but because it should have been ordinary all along. The path to healing wasn't a straight line. There were still days when a raised voice would trigger my anxiety, or I'd catch myself shrinking my own needs to please others. But the difference now was that I could recognize these moments for what they were: echoes of old wounds gradually fading away. Looking back on that fateful dinner, now from a place of strength and wisdom, I see that the spilled wine didn't ruin my life, it saved it. That moment of crisis forced me to confront the truths I had been avoiding, and to make choices that, while painful, ultimately led me to freedom. Every day I am grateful that I found the courage to leave, grateful that I chose myself when no one else would, grateful for understanding that being alone is infinitely better than being with someone who won't protect you from harm, or worse, who makes excuses for those who cause it. If you are watching this and something in my story resonates with you, please know that you deserve respect. You deserve safety. You deserve to be with people who would never make you choose between your dignity and their love. The hardest part is always the first step, whether it's admitting there's a problem, asking for help, or walking away from a situation that makes you feel small. But I promise you, on the other side of that step, there is a life you might not even be able to imagine right now. A life where you are whole, valued, and free. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect yourself? Please share your story in the comments below. And if this message has helped you in any way, consider liking and subscribing to help support others who might need to hear it. Remember, sometimes walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself. And that choice can save your life, just as it saved mine. Thank you for listening to my story.